Good evening. I hope you all are trying to keep safe. I'm very sorry for the technical glitches that we had kept you waiting. This is Dr. Yogeshwari, a final year postgraduate student, Department of Prosthodontics, Uttarakhand State Health Sinodent, and your host for today's webinar, along with Dr. Prateek Bam, Public Relations Head Sinodent, as our co-host. I heartily welcome you all today. First of all, I would like to thank our founder and CEO, Dr. Anmol Bagaria ma'am, and the entire team of Sinodent for organizing today's webinar. Sinodent is global healthcare for all, and we bring to you Sinodent India and Sinodent International. Sinodent is a unique healthcare platform which is made available first time globally. It is getting a revolutionary change in India by bringing a digital healthcare platform that is providing and enhancing a good relationship between patients and doctors and is also enabling real-time appointment scheduling. Our goal is to create easy and fast access to healthcare services. Sinodent International has got for you research cell, block section, and educational programs for doctors to enhance their knowledge and skills and to keep them updated with the recent developments. We are currently doing free webinars for students, dentists, and senior practitioners from India and across the globe, which is different from the webinar era going on since COVID. We are designing papers, mock tests, and sending and arranging textbooks for budding dentists, thus trying to uplift our noble profession each day. Sinodent is also working for social welfare and humanity to enhance the quality of life by providing healthcare needs, health awareness, and free treatment. While our country is battling with COVID-19, the issues of post-COVID sepsis has emerged as a significant problem, and India is turning out to be the diabetic and mucormycotic capital of the world, which is all the more devastating. Hence, to demystify mucormycosis, we have among us Dr. Anuj Kumar Sir. Sir is a renowned name in the field of cranio and maxillofacial surgery and facial aesthetics in Eastern India. He is associated as a consultant to Bhagwan Mahavir Medical Super Speciality Hospital, Ranchi. He is also serving as an associate professor at Awadh Dental College and Hospital. He has served as an honorable treasurer and joint secretary of the Association of Maxillofacial Surgeons of India and is currently the state representative to the NEC of AOMSI. Sir is quite holistic and has a deep interest in yoga. He is also in the state executive committee of Indian Yoga Association. He has around 10 national and international publications with special interest in the field of maxillofacial trauma, implantology, and facial aesthetic procedures. Sir is also the course mentor for surgical education and training programs for dental practitioners in the field of maxillofacial surgery. Dr. Anuj is also regularly invited as a guest speaker for various national conferences. Thank you for joining us today, sir. So please guide us with our topic.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for giving my so kind introduction. So we are already running a bit late, so I'll just start with our discussion for today, the mucormycosis. So it's an epidemic within a pandemic. So what we are facing currently in this unprecedented pandemic situation, and then out of nowhere we are now stuck with mucormycosis, or very wrongly or as a misnomer also known as black fungus. So mucormycosis is basically a serious but rare fungal disorder which is caused by a group of molds known as mucormycetes. The Rhizopus oryzae is the most common organism which is isolated from the patients who have recovered from mucormycosis and is responsible for 70% of all the cases. These molds live throughout the environment and are mostly found on the wet surfaces, fruits, etc., and also in the environment. However, the presence on the wet surface is much more. Now, talking about the risk factors, the most common risk factors are uncontrolled diabetes mellitus, especially when the patient is also having diabetic ketoacidosis, treatment with corticosteroid, organ or bone marrow transplantation, neutropenia, trauma and burns, and malignant hematological disorder. As far as COVID is concerned, mainly those patients who are into diabetic ketoacidosis, who have undergone long-term oxygen therapy, those who have been treated with steroids or tocilizumab, which is a monoclonal antibody, those such patients are at high risk. And the most unfortunate part of the disease is that even after such a resective surgery, such as disfiguring surgical debridement and an antifungal therapy, the overall mortality is as high as 50%, and it approaches to around 100% in such cases where there is a dissemination or in cases where there is a neurological deficit. Again, with patients with persistent neutropenia, the severity is much more. Now, talking about the pathophysiology, it is basically the angioinvasion. The basic pathophysiology by which the mucormycosis works is angioinvasion. It basically attacks the blood vessels, causes thrombosis, and subsequently there is tissue necrosis. As there is tissue necrosis and thrombosis, the delivery of leukocytes can't be done, and the antifungal agents are not able to work properly, leading to the foci of infection. Also, what's important is that it's the angioinvasion which is the reason why the disseminated form is the chances of dissemination are so high. The reason why diabetic ketoacidotic patients are most commonly affected is because the fungus needs low pH, and in a situation where there is a ketoacidosis, the phagocytic action of the neutrophils are dysfunctional and leading to impaired chemotaxis. And this is the reason why the host mechanism itself is not able to tackle the fungal growth. It is not able to control the fungal growth. Again, if we talk about why it is so difficult to treat, because it is not only the host factor which is important, but the ability of the inhaled spongiopore to germinate and to cause angioinvasion is the main reason why the difficulty to treat mucormycosis is so high. Again, the recent data which has come, it also suggests that the level of available unbound iron, the level of ferritin, it has a very critical factor in causing the diabetic ketoacidosis patient to mucormycosis. As we all know, even in patients with COVID, what we are seeing is the patients where the serum ferritin level is high. So that again predisposes them to the risk of mucormycosis. Now, talking about why so much of high risk in COVID, because mucormycosis, though it is a rare disease, India is one of the country where the largest number of cases are reported. Even before the COVID era, India was one country where the number of mucormycosis was very high. But in COVID, we all know COVID itself is a condition with a chronic respiratory disease. And then while treatment, we treat them on long-term corticosteroids. We treat them with mechanical ventilation. We have patients who are on prolonged oxygenation. People are on high flow oxygen, they are on BiPAP, and then subsequently many patients are on ECMO or ventilation. So all these, the chronicity of the disease, it is the main factor which leads to the increased risk of mucormycosis. Again, we have monoclonal antibody, for example, tocilizumab. It is anti-IL-6. Now, IL-6 plays a very important role in host defense. Now, when we prescribe the patient on something like tocilizumab, which suppresses the action of interleukin-6, the risk of immunodeficiency increases manifold. Okay, so talking about mortality rate. As we all know, the overall mortality rate in mucormycosis is as high as 50%. However, in cases where there is a pulmonary embolism, it is 50 to 70%. In rhinocerebral, it is not 30 to 70, it is 70 to 100%. That's a typing error. In rhinocerebral cases, there is 70 to 100% mortality rate. In CNS involvement or disseminated, again the mortality rate increases to 80 to 90%. So these are the mortality rate. Now talking about the clinical features, uh, the clinical features can be divided into your facial finding, your intraoral finding, your nasal finding, orbital finding, and neurological finding. First and foremost, coming to facial findings, what we can see is facial swelling. Typically, the patient might complain of facial pain, which is radiating to your jaw or radiating towards your temporal muscle, radiating towards eye. Periorbital pain, that's a frequent complaint. Again, paresthesia is something which is very, I won't say unique, but it is very a distinctive feature as compared to the dental pain. When the patients complain of dental pain, any odontogenic cause, you won't find a complaint of paresthesia. But in cases of mucormycosis, you will find the typical complaint of paresthesia. Uh, Again, it is not only the mucormycosis. Even in cases of acute osteomyelitis, we find the complaint of paresthesia. Any sinus tract and the discoloration of skin. These are the common facial findings. Again, coming to nasal finding, what we commonly see is foul smelling nasal discharge. On endoscopy, you can find black nasal ester. Patients complain of nasal congestion and the complaints of sinusitis. The complaint of sinusitis is very typical. Coming to intraoral finding, the patients might complain of halitosis. There might be intraoral pus discharge. Exposed palatal bone is something which is you can see commonly while oral examination. An unexplained loosening of tooth. The periodontal condition might not suggest, but the grade of mobility might be higher. So these things should, you should be very cautious when you see such symptoms. Coming to the symptoms like orbital findings, patient might complain of orbital pain. You might see proptosis or exophthalmos, periorbital cellulitis, and vision loss in advanced stages. Then, apart from these, we have neurological findings like headache or neurological deficit. In some patients, we also find a case of cerebral abscess. In cases of patients where there is a pulmonary involvement, what we can see is hemoptysis, cough, chest pain, dyspnea. Those things we can see when it has disseminated to lungs. Now, coming to investigations, there are a few important points. Coming to CSCBC, patients are typically neutropenic. So that's a very important thing, and we should all remember. For example, when we talk about immunocompromised patient, HIV is a condition where you find that there is a immunocompromised state. But again, in patients with HIV, we don't find the incidence as high as diabetic as far as mucormycosis is concerned. The main reason is that the involvement of neutropenia is very important. The phagocytic action of the neutropenia, if it is compromised, then the risk increases. In HIV patients, it's mainly the T lymphocyte and B lymphocyte which are compromised. So the overall neutropenic actions are overall, they are substantial. That's why we don't see so much of increase of cases in HIV patients. Again, the renal function test is very important. Why? Because the treatment which is given, the first line of treatment is amphotericin B, which is highly nephrotoxic. So you have to have a baseline data so that you can decide at what dose you need to give amphotericin B. So renal function test is very important. Again, the sugar level, for that we need to have FBS, postprandial blood sugar, HbA1c, glycated hemoglobin. In cases where you are suspecting that there might be neurological involvement, we can go for CSF, cerebrospinal fluid examination. Apart from these parameters, what we can have is nasal endoscopy. Nasal endoscopy, you need to refer to the patient to an ENT surgeon, and they will, through the nasal endoscope, they will try to see if there is any black adture. Uh, Coming to radiological, there are two things very important. First thing is contrast enhanced CT, in which you will typically find erosion and thinning of heart tissue. In case it is involving the heart tissue, what you will find is osteolytic lesion. That's again a point where you can differentiate it from odontogenic cause. Most of the odontogenic factors, apart from malignancy and osteomyelitis, the odontogenic lesions, they are not so much of osteolytic. But what you will find in mucormycosis is typical like osteomyelitis. There will be a osteolytic lesion, there will be erosion and thinning of heart tissue. There can be mucosal thickening in the sinus and change in the fat planes. Now, if we talk about MRI with gadolinium contrast is one of the gold standard, and we typically find features of optic neuritis, cavernous sinus thrombosis, intracranial involvement. You can rule out with the help of MRI. Involvement of infratemporal fossa, that we need to rule out by having a MRI image. Like in this image, what we can see is a T2 weighted coronal section, and there is hyper intense signal intensity along the peripheral of the left maxillary sinus. So, and again, there's a displacement of globe. So these are the typical findings which you will find in a patient with mucormycosis when we go for MRI with contrast finding. Now coming to the another important factor, which is biopsy. Why biopsy is important? Because it is the once you have we have the diagnostic radiographs, we need to confirm it through biopsy. And what is important is the sample to be collected. Generally we collect samples in formalin, but when we go for samples collection in a patient with mucormycosis, and if you are taking the swab test, especially for KOH, it needs to be collected in saline. So that's one important thing that we must remember, that when you are taking swab for KOH testing to diagnose the presence of fungi, you need to collect the sample in saline. And if you are sending it for histopathology, what we need to have is the necrosed bone, and they look for angioinvasion so that they will rule out what is the if there is a presence of fungus or not. Now, coming to the treatment, the treatment overall can be divided into two parts: the medical treatment and the surgical treatment. We must remember that both the modality is equally important. You have to be aggressive with the surgery, first thing. Second thing, you might have to repeat the surgery again and again. So there might be need of repeated surgery. So that is one thing you need to consult the patient. And coming to medical, you have to start the patient on antifungal injectable amphotericin B. And we have a comprehensive guideline from the global guideline by European Confederation of Medical Mycology. So that's a very precise guideline which they have given. First and foremost, they have advised against the use of dry amphotericin. What they have suggested is that only liposomal amphotericin B is advisable. First thing. Second thing, they have advised to avoid the slow escalation of drug. So when you are starting the patient on amphotericin B, you can't slowly increase the doses. You have to give the full doses at once. And what should be doses that have also been defined in patients where there is only involvement of the sinus without any involvement of neurological deficit or any orbital involvement. The doses which is recommended is 5 mg per kg body weight. That is a single day dose which has to be given over 4 to 6 hours. In cases where there is neurological involvement, the doses should be 10 mg per kg body weight. So that is the doses, and we have to monitor the the prognosis of the patient every week. If you think that patient is recovering, then from the second week onward, we can go ahead with the second line of treatment, which are basically azole derivatives. Also, in cases where we cannot put the patient on amphotericin B, looking at the the condition of renal, the amount of renal toxicity, the amphotericin B, the risk, the risk of renal toxicity. In such patients, we can go ahead with posaconazole or isavuconazole. So the dosage is 300 mg twice daily for day 1, 300 mg once daily from day 2. This doses you have to give for 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks we can revise. In cases when you want a substitute apart from posaconazole, what you can give is isavuconazole. The dosage is 200 mg thrice daily for day 1 and day 2, and from day 3 onwards, what we can give is 200 mg daily once. And again, after 7 to 10 days, you need to evaluate how the patient is doing. If the symptoms are less, then accordingly we can plan ahead. Now, apart from the medical line of treatment, what is indispensable is the surgical line of treatment. You need to have a aggressive surgical resection of the involved tissue. As we all know, the pathogenesis itself, it leads to tissue necrosis. So you need to get rid of those necrosed tissue, all those dead tissue you need to get rid of. So the surgical debridements become very important, and it's complete multidisciplinary approach. You need to involve a ENT surgeon, a maxillofacial surgeon, a ophthalmologist, plastic surgeon, and neurosurgeon. They should have it should be a complete team effort, and then only we'll have a desired result. Now, again, we have a guideline from Government Medical Institute from Ahmedabad, the Civil Hospital Ahmedabad. So they have delineated that what should be the treatment depending upon the involvement. If there is only nasal and sinus involvement without any bony erosion, what you need to have is just an ENT surgeon opinion who can do an endoscopic sinus surgery. You can remove the necrotic tissue, and it is done. However, in cases where there is bony involvement, whether it is maxilla or whether it is zygoma, then you need to have a surgical debridement by either a maxillofacial surgeon and then endoscopic sinus surgery by ENT surgeon. In cases where you need to where even the zygoma is involved and orbital involvement is also seen, in such cases the role of ophthalmologist become very important. If the ophthalmologist think that the extent of disease is such that we cannot preserve the orbit, in such cases they can go either for extenteration, or if there is a minor involvement, they can go for orbital debridement. But the risk has to be judged by them. If there is a high risk that patient can undergo neurological deficit, in such cases it is always advisable to go for extenteration to save the life of the patient. In cases where there is a neurological involvement, or the fungus has disseminated to frontal bone and skull base, in such cases you need to have an endoscopic clearance of sinus, of frontal and ethmoidal sinus by ENT surgeon, and the neurosurgeon can decide what is the safe maximum resection which can be done to safeguard the patient. Now we'll have a short case discussion on a patient. This is the first patient which we had treated in Jharkhand. It is possibly the first reported case of mycosis in Jharkhand. So he was a young 34-year-old male who recovered from COVID 10 days back, and a known diabetic patient. He was also treated for diabetic ketoacidosis, and he went to a local dentist with a chief complaint of loosening of tooth. And basically the tooth came out when oral prophylaxis was being done, and the patient was referred, and then we did a CT scan, and we found that there was, if you'll see, there is a complete obliteration of right maxillary sinus. Okay, we can see that almost there's also bony erosion. We can see the clinical finding. There's complete parietal necrosis. There's complete necrosis. There is involvement of soft tissue. We can see how the socket looks. we can also see the empty socket from which the tooth came out. So the patient presented to us in this condition. So when we did a CT, we found that there is complete bony erosion. So we decided, since zygoma was involved, we can see how zygoma was involved. There was bony erosion, and there was involvement of the complete maxillary sinus. So we decided to go for hemimaxillectomy, and we can see, there is a defect on the zygoma, on the malar eminence. You can see how that eaten appearance is seen, and we went for complete resection. Complete sinus clearance was done. Luckily for this patient, there was no involvement of frontal sinus. This is okay, fine. This is the post-op photograph at the time of suture removal, and this is the intraoral photograph around 1 month back after the surgery. So we can see how the pre and post is there. If this is the sign of disease free. So we have all healthy keratinized tissue. Once we get rid of that fungal mold. So you need to have a very good resection. You cannot do a half-hearted resection. It's complete necrosed tissue. You need to get rid of the necrosed tissue. Then only you will have a good healing. So that's very essential. We must remember that a good resection, a good clearance is very important. Now, coming to frequently asked questions, are all people affected with COVID susceptible for mucormycosis? No. So only if you are immunocompromised, you have been treated with long-term steroid, you are, there is uncontrolled sugar. In such cases, the risk increases. Those patients whose sugar is under control, just because you were infected with COVID does not make you susceptible for mucormycosis. Okay, so there should not be unnecessary fear among people that if I have COVID, I will, develop mucormycosis. So that's not the case. Are non-diabetic patients at risk for mucormycosis? Yes. It's not only the diabetes which makes you immunocompromised. If you are neutropenic, the risk increases. If you have been put on monoclonal antibody, the risk increases. So it's not just diabetes which makes you at risk. It's the generalized immunocompromised state, which makes you at risk. Again, are all diabetic people who have been taken steroids at risk for mucormycosis? No. There is a minimum doses. The minimum doses of 0.3 mg per kg per day of prednisolone equivalent. If you have been treated with so much of steroid, 0.3 mg per kg per day, then you are susceptible. Okay. Otherwise, if your sugar is under control, you have been given short dose steroid, it doesn't make you susceptible. Is it contagious? No. There is no evidence of human to human transmission of mucormycosis. Okay. So these are the commonly asked questions. Now, as a dental practitioner, the overall role of dentists become very important. Why? Because the majority of these patients will come with the complaint of dental or facial pain. So you might be the first physician to which the patients come post-COVID. They might complain of facial pain and they will come to you for facial pain. It is our obligation to diagnose the patient, to take the proper history. And again, never completely rely on the patient history. Just do not rely on what the patient tells to you. They might be misinformed. They might not have they might not know the complete history. So always refer to the treatment summary. Always ask for the treatment summary. You take the history. If you think that patient has recovered from COVID, always ask for treatment summary. See what all drugs were given, and then decide how much at risk the patient is. So take proper history and not solely rely on patient history. So that is important. Always be suspicious if there is abnormal tooth mobility. In case where you see that there, multiple teeth are mobile, and you find that there is no such obvious reason, in such cases, always be suspicious. In patients where there is tooth pain, but you don't find any tenderness in any of the tooth, you don't find any obvious cause, in such cases be very suspicious. As we had already discussed, any sign of paresthesia should be taken utmost seriously. The paresthesia is one of the key finding, which the patient might tell you. Even if the patient does not tell you, make sure you ask this question, that whether there is any numbness. So that is a very important way to rule out. Any draining sinus. If there is any draining sinus, either extraorally or intraorally, the patient has recovered from COVID, the patient is a known immunocompromised patient, or the patient has the signs like patient is neutropenic, or there is a history of tocilizumab. In such cases, take any draining sinus very seriously. Never delay specialist opinion. In case you find that patient might have a slightest risk of developing mucormycosis, always take an expert opinion, refer to a maxillofacial surgeon, refer to a ENT surgeon, or you can just take their opinion, and then you can decide to rule out the mucormycosis. So that is very important. Now, there is a 5-point guideline which has been given by Niti Aayog, Government of India, to prevent the mucormycosis. So we know what is mucormycosis. We know what are the signs and symptoms. We briefly know what the treatment has to be done, and we know as a dental surgeon what is our importance as a dental surgeon. Now, for the general public, it is very important to know how to prevent. So the first and foremost is always have a vigilant control over sugar. That's the most important. To have your sugar under control is very important in your post-COVID phase. Do not take steroids without recommendation from any medical professionals. Again, medical professionals should also refrain from prescribing steroid if these are not indicated. So you need to take steroid only when it is required, and you need to take in the right doses. So here the role of physician as well as the patient both is equally important. Third thing is the role of distilled or sterile water. I was just seeing few messages where it was written that it does not spread from humidifier. It is wrong. There are incidences where the patient has been treated on prolonged oxygen, and there is increased risk of developing mucormycosis if your humidifier contains impure water. So you need to have distilled sterile water for humidifier. Overall cleanliness is very important. Regularly have your you can prescribe betadine mouthwash or 0.2% betadine for nasal wash. So these are very important. Apart from betadine wash, overall cleanliness of the patient, they should refrain from going to sites where there is the building sites where the construction is being done. From those sites you should refrain from going if you have just recovered from COVID. And treat any ulcer. Any oral ulcer should be treated immediately. If you develop any oral ulcer, go to your nearest dentist, take their opinion, and get them treated. So these are the 5-point guidelines which was given by Niti Aayog to prevent the incidence of mucormycosis. We all know that it is a rare disorder, but in spite of its rarity, the volume of cases which we are seeing right now is phenomenal. Daily we are seeing 4 to 5 cases, where I'm sure that most of us would have seen maximum 1 or 2 cases in over a decade. Like I have seen 1 cases from my final year till 2020. I have seen a single case, and in last I guess 2 or 3 weeks I have seen 15 cases, where 14 cases are in last 10 days. So definitely the magnitude of the severity is high. So we must remember that we have to be very cautious, and we are the treating physician. As a dental surgeon, the patients will commonly come to us for dental pain. So we have to diagnose them early, so that we can treat them with as so that we don't need to go for a very resective surgery. So at least that we can prevent. So in case of we'll have a discussion. If we have any question, we'll discuss it here. You can reach out to me at my email address, or you can contact me on my WhatsApp, and we'll open for any question. If we have any question, we'll go ahead with that.
Thank you so much for this wonderful insight, Anuj sir. We have a few questions from audiences. Should we proceed, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Sir, one delegate wants to know, what are the chances of COVID recovered patient getting infected with mucormycosis when he or she is exposed to plasma donation? Are there any chances?
First and foremost, there is no role of plasma donation. There is no absolute zero role of plasma in treating any COVID patient anywhere in this world. There is a clear-cut guideline from any possible research article. Any research article you take, there is no role of plasma at any stage. Possibly we are the only country in this world who are still wasting our resources, who are wasting our so much of effort to ask patient to donate their plasma, and then we are doing stupid things like donating plasma and storing them. So please do not donate plasma. It's not going to help. First thing. Second thing, if you have already donated, there is no risk. Just plasma donation does not make you susceptible for mucormycosis.
Thank you so much, sir. So the next question is, what are the chances of getting infected with mucormycosis for the patients who had been diagnosed with COVID and they were recovered at their home itself? So
in cases where you are not a diabetic, you have not been treated with high dose steroid, you have not been on oxygen support, there is no risk of developing mucormycosis.
So how late is too much late in the treatment of mucormycosis, since it spreads very rapidly? Cases are there?
It's very difficult to say. It depends on person to person. Like I have a patient. I lost a patient where the patient came to me with orbital swelling, and second day we lost her. I have seen patients who have came with complete nasal obliteration, complete parietal necrosis, and he came to me after 2 weeks. Like the patient with the case which I shared, the patient came to me 2 weeks after developing that parietal necrosis. So it mainly depends upon other factors: how immunocompromised you are, what is your neutrophilic, how much neutropenic you are, okay, and how much is your lung condition. We are losing patients sometimes who are coming to us with high oxygen demand, and we might lose them due to due to other complication. It's not might be due to mucormycosis, but other complication. So the factors like how much compromised your lung is and how much immunocompromised the patient is, these two are very important. So in cases these parameters are high, it can progress really fast. It can progress within 48 hours.
So are there any cases that have reported involvement of mandible with mucormycosis?
No, till now I have not seen cases. I have not seen cases where there is involvement of mandible. But I guess there are few cases which has been reported. I have personally not seen any case, but I guess I have read some article where they have developed mucormycosis in mandible.
Yes, sir. So what is the most important intervention to be taken care with young patients who are not diabetic but have recovered from COVID? And so what is the latency period when the patient gets recovered from COVID till the time that he develops the symptoms for mucormycosis?
Okay. The mean period is 2 to 3 weeks. The most susceptible period is 2 to 3 weeks. But there are patients who are still COVID positive, who are still in ICU, and they have developed mucormycosis. So though the mean period is 2 to 3 weeks, but you have to be very careful when you are, in your ICU care. The role of nursing staff becomes very important when you are in your ICU care. But mean period is 2 to 3 weeks.
Sir, any chances of pedo patients getting mucormycosis?
No, the rhinocerebral mucormycosis is very rarely seen in pediatric patients. What we see in pediatric patients is gastrointestinal mucormycosis, and that's deadly. The overall mortality is 90%. So rhinocerebral mucormycosis is very rare in pediatric patients. Mucormycosis with gastrointestinal, it is very commonly seen in pediatric patients.
So do we need to involve a pediatrician as early as possible, or should we go for palliative treatment for pedo patients?
For it's all, if there is a pediatric patient, you should always involve a pediatrician. But the very less case report are for pediatric patients. Rhinocerebral mucormycosis very rare. In patients who are with hematological disorders, hematological tumors, in such patients you can see mucormycosis. As far as COVID is concerned, I don't think we'll see any case of mucormycosis developing in pediatric patients.
So, what will be a differential diagnosis of mucormycosis?
Osteomyelitis.
Osteomyelitis. Yes, sir.
But always be susceptible. Never think about any odontogenic cause. If there is no odontogenic region for dental pain, do not search for odontogenic cause.
Yes, sir. So, any home remedies for diabetic patients to prevent mucormycosis who have recovered from COVID and are on steroid therapy while they were in hospital?
I am not an expert on home therapy. I've heard someone given jamun or something, but please don't do that. Get an expert opinion. Consult your diabetologist. Please, if your sugar level is high, at least for now, for God's sake, we have taken doxycycline in tons. We have taken ivermectin. We have taken hydroxychloroquine. We have taken all the possible things. At least for diabetes, don't start taking your home remedy. Even if there is home remedy, for example, if you do not trust there might be few people who don't trust allopathic. When there is an acute condition like diabetic ketoacidosis, your any homemade solution is not going to work. You need to have insulin. Okay, so okay, fine. When you are on maintenance, do whatever hell you want to do. When you are in acute phase, at least don't go for these Ayurveda, and I'm not Ayurveda, but any home remedy.
As an adjunct therapy, we can use it.
Yes, as a maintenance, whatever you want to do, you can do.
So with this, we come to an end to our today's webinar. Thank you for this informative and insightful webinar, sir. Thank you for answering all our doubts and queries. With this, I thank Team Cynodent, and I call upon Dr. Anmol Bagadia for concluding this session. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone who have joined us across the globe. I thank Anup sir for giving us his valuable time this evening and giving us the information which is needed this hour and which will help us in diagnosing our patients and help us in saving few lives. Thank you, sir, for giving a valuable time, and thank you, Dr. Yogeshwari and Prateek for hosting this session.